Good morning and welcome to the Every Student Succeeds Act webinar. We have just a few reminders today. The slides will advance automatically throughout the presentation. Should you need technical assistance, click on the help icon. You are encouraged to submit a question at any time during today's presentation by typing in the Ask a Question tab and clicking Submit. In order to stay within our time, we will not be able to answer all questions individually, but all questions will be reviewed to provide future guidance. If your screen freezes or the slides do not appear to be advancing as they should, please try exiting and restarting the session, as it may be an issue with your connectivity. I will now turn the call over to Jeremy Marks, Director of the Office of Federal Programs at the Ohio Department of Education. Please go ahead, Jeremy.
Thank you very much, and good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us for the ESSA webinar regarding federal funding options and flexibilities. This is the 9th in a series of webinars the department is hosting to engage with you regarding our Ohio ESSA plan. It is critical for us to get your feedback so Ohio can craft and submit a plan which can reflect the needs of Ohio students, educators, and communities. In order for this to happen, we must gather everyone's input. This morning, we will be covering a lot of information. My hope is to provide you with a high-level overview of the funding provisions that we know at this time to be in the reauthorized Elementary and Secondary Education Act, known as the Every Student Succeeds Act, ESSA. As an overview, we will cover the following topics: general ESSA funding points, state-level options, title programs in an overview, and this will cover general purposes of the title, formula of the title, local level options, uses of funds if there are any new uses in the ESSA Act, fiscal issues, and non-public equitable services. Before we jump into a lot of detail, I think it's important to know that in general, most of the ESSA requirements begin in the 2017-18 school year. In other words, this year, school year 2016-17, is a planning year. So the funding allocations that districts received in July are under the No Child Left Behind ESSA requirements. So keep in mind that we are not expecting the complete federal guidance on all the ESSA funding implementation issues before the start of next year. So we will be developing our state plan and making system upgrades to our e-grant system, known as the CCIP, based on our interpretation. In general, ESSA keeps in place most of the larger programs under No Child Left Behind. These include Title I, Title II, Title III. In addition, the formula used to determine funding is relatively the same, with some exceptions, and we'll cover those exceptions later in the webinar. Lastly, ESSA did eliminate and consolidate several small to mid-sized grants, but the authorized uses of those funds is allowable in other program areas, and we will note some of those later in the webinar. ESSA provides authorized level of funding for some of the grant programs, but it's important to understand that what is authorized may be different than what is actually appropriated. The annual level of funding for a program is determined during the appropriations process annually approved by Congress. At this time, we do not know the amounts we will receive for ESSA programs. Congress is currently working on the fiscal year 2017 appropriations bills, which includes funding levels for education programs. And once that appropriations process is completed, the U.S. Department will be able to determine the award amounts for states. This slide gives a quick overview of our funding process. Ohio allocates two types of education grants to districts and subrecipients. First are formula grants, such as Title I and Title II, that are allocated annually by prescribed formula. The second is competitive grants, such as 21st Century Community Learning Center grants, where eligible entities apply for funds. It's important to note that not all applicants or entities receive competitive funds. For formula grants, the department usually receives preliminary award amounts from the U.S. Department each spring. The department then makes allocation determinations for districts generally in May or June, so districts can begin budgeting to spend their funds at the start of the year in July. For competitive grants, the department generally starts the application process each February and closes the application window by the end of April. The competitive grants are scored and the awards are provided around July. In Ohio, the formula grants are part of the consolidated application process, which is in the Comprehensive Continuous Improvement Plan, known as the CCIP, and the CCIP is a planning and funding application or tool for our districts. ESSA provides states and districts with some funding options to consider. The department has been reaching out to stakeholders to discuss these funding options, as these decisions will be incorporated in our state plan we submit to the U.S. Department of Education next year. It is important to hear from our customers on these funding options, as they may have an impact on the funding levels the districts receive. For the next few slides, we will discuss the key state funding options. First, under Title I, Part A, the state must reserve 7% of its Title I award for school improvement activities. 95% of the 7% must be allocated to districts that have low-performing schools or those that are in comprehensive or targeted support. The flexibility option for the state in this area is whether these funds go out to the districts by formula or by competition. As we discussed in a previous slide, not all low-performing schools will receive funds under a competition. The second flexibility option is called direct student services. Under Title I, Part A, the state may reserve up to an additional 3% of the Title I award to provide grants to eligible districts for them to offer and pay for direct student services. And some examples of that are advanced placement courses or courses not offered at the school where the child attends, or things like supplemental tutoring. If the state elects to do this program, it has discretion on the districts that would receive these additional funds, but priority would go to districts that have schools in comprehensive or targeted support. It's important to note that if the state reserves funds for direct student services, it must maintain a list of high-quality tutoring providers, similar to the Supplemental Education Services program under No Child Left Behind. The third state flexibility option is known as Schoolwide. ESSA allows the state to waive the 40% low-income student threshold to operate a school-wide program. School-wide programming is intended to improve the academic achievement in the entire school, and under a school-wide program, all students are considered Title I eligible, and all teachers are considered Title I teachers. In other words, the use of funds does not have to be targeted to a certain population like it would be under a targeted assistance program. If the state waives the 40% poverty threshold to operate a school-wide program, the state will need to come up with the criteria to use for allowing such waivers. The fourth state flexibility option is under Title II Part A grant. Under Title II Part A, which is a grant to support effective instruction, the state has the option to set aside up to 3% of the award that goes to districts. To put this in context, 95% of the state's Title II-A award goes out to districts to help them improve educator quality. Under this flexibility, the state may also reserve an additional 3% of that 95% to support principals and other school leaders. Okay, before we move on to the local level flexibilities, we want to take this opportunity to hear from you on one of our statewide options. This poll question is about our school-wide flexibility. As we discussed in the last slide, the state is allowed to waive the 40% low-income threshold for a school to operate a school-wide program. So the question is, are you aware of school-wide programming and the poverty threshold? Your choices are yes or no, and we will give you a few seconds to respond. Okay, well, from our results, we see about 73% of those who responded are aware of the school-wide programming and the poverty threshold, and about 78% are unaware. So the next question is, what do you believe the poverty threshold should be to operate a school-wide program? The options are 40%, 35%, 30%, or other. Again, we will give you a few moments to respond. Okay, so we see a pretty good differences of opinion on what the poverty threshold should be. We see about 32% say 40%, about 15% say 35%, about 36% say 30%, and others is about 18%. Thank you very much. So the last question that we have is, should the state take other issues into consideration to allow schools under 40% poverty to operate school-wide programming? For those of you who may not know this, in order for a school to be Title I served, or in other words, receive Title I funds, the school must have a poverty level of either 35% or be above the district-wide poverty average. So as you think about the answer to this question, consider whether other issues should be considered for allowing a waiver under 40% poverty, such as school performance, gap closure grades, or allocation size for the school. For instance, can a school run an effective school-wide program if they have less than 40,000? The answers to this question, again, are yes or no, and we'll give you a few moments to respond. Okay, thank you for your responses. We see overwhelmingly the answer is yes, about 86% to those that said no, which is about 14%. So thank you very much for your participation in this in our poll. So next we're going to dive into the main title programs and discuss the funding provisions and identify some new options for districts. So Title I Part A, ESSA generally broadens the strategies to improve educational opportunities and thus the uses of funds to address the district and school needs. Some examples of new language and uses of funds include, under school-wide programming, ESSA adds language about counseling and mental health programs, mentoring services, access to advanced coursework, student behavioral supports, recruitment and retention activities for teachers, and others. ESSA also incorporates the concept of a well-rounded education in both the school-wide and targeted assistance program models. And ESSA allows districts with schools identified for comprehensive support to offer students the right to transfer to another non-identified school. Districts may use up to 5% for transportation for this activity, but school choice is not required. Additional changes to the uses of funds under Title I include The LEA may reserve funds to provide early childhood education programs for eligible Title I children. Now, this was always allowed under No Child Left Behind, but ESSA made it explicit. LEAs may lower the 75% poverty threshold for serving high schools to 50%. And high schools may use Title I funds for the cost of dual or concurrent enrollment programs, including training teachers, tuition, fees, books and materials, and transportation. And it's important to note, though, in targeted assistance programs, the services are limited to eligible students with the greatest need for assistance. In addition, ESSA allows districts to reserve more than 1%, which was the percentage under No Child Left Behind, for parent and family engagement activities. When reserving funds for parent and family engagement activities, 90% of the reserve needs to go to high-needs Title I schools. ESSA also creates a new per-pupil funding pilot program that allows a district to consolidate state, local, and certain federal funds to create a weighted per-pupil funding system. Now, we do not have guidance on this program yet, and there are many unknowns, but we do know that the districts who are considered for this pilot must ensure and demonstrate that their low-income schools do not receive less per-pupil funds than their higher wealth schools. The districts applied directly to the U.S. Department for this flexibility, and this pilot will select up to 50 districts nationally. ESSA maintains certain fiscal requirements, such as comparability, supplement not supplant, and maintenance of effort that were part of the previous act. However, there are some new flexibilities as well. Supplement not supplant requirements for Title I, and it's important to know this is for Title I only, have been modified under ESSA. The U.S. Department of Education just released proposed regulations. For purposes of this webinar, we are not going to be able to get into all the particulars, but we encourage districts to review those proposed regulations. In general, for Title I, and again, Title I only, the test for determining if a district meets the supplement not supplant requirement has changed. The regulations give 4 options for districts to choose from that basically ensure that they are providing their Title I schools at least the same amount of state and local funding as their non-Title I schools before providing federal funds. ESSA also provided some flexibility on maintenance of effort. It allows districts to have their allocations reduced if they fail to maintain 90% effort from 1 year if the LEA or district did not fail maintenance of effort in the 5 immediately preceding fiscal years. In other words, it's essentially a 1-year pause. Also, the U.S. Department of Education may waive maintenance of effort requirements if there are changes to a district's organizational structure. And another note about fiscal flexibilities is transferability. This isn't on your slide, but under Title V, states and districts are allowed to transfer 100% of their funds under Title IIA and Title IVA between these programs or into, but not out of Title I. This used to be a 50% threshold. Jumping to Title II, ESSA makes some formula changes that will impact the amount of funding going to states and districts. Title II has 2 parts to the state formula. There's a hold harmless portion, which provides a certain level of funding each year to the state, and that will be phased out over the next 7 years. There's also a portion of funding that is provided based on student enrollment and poverty. ESSA will phase in a formula that is based on 20% population and 80% poverty by 2020. Again, this is at the state level, and these modifications will impact how much Ohio receives. The state reserves 1% for admin, 4% for state-level activities, and 95% goes to the districts. But remember from the previous slides we talked about, of that 95%, the state has an option to allow an additional 3% for principals and school leaders. The Title II formula also changed for districts. ESSA removes the hold harmless provision at the district level starting next year. There is no phase down like it was for the states. ESSA also requires district allocations next year to be based on 20% of the number of 5 to 17-year-olds in the school, in the district, and 80% of low-income 5 to 17-year-olds. This will impact the amount of Title IIA funds the district receives. Turning to Title IIA programming, ESSA expands the use of Title II Part A funds, including but not limited to class size reduction, hiring, retention, support, technical assistance, professional development, training on behavior, incentive pay, evaluation, and support systems. You have probably heard a lot about evidence-based in other webinars. For Title II Part A, the use of funds for class size reduction or personalized professional development must be evidence-based. Title II Part B has several new programs. These programs range from performance-based incentive compensation programs to improving literacy instruction, to improving history and civics instruction, and to supporting professional development and teacher preparation. We encourage you to review the supplemental document that is provided for more information. In many cases, the U.S. Department will need to create and develop the applications. It is not known at this time how much funding will be appropriated for each of these competitive grant programs. And eligibility for these grants varies across the grant program. In some cases, it's the state, some cases it's the district, or educational organizations, or a combination who would be eligible for these grants. Title III, the uses of funding under Title III Part A are the same as under No Child Left Behind, except funds may be used for preschool language instructional programs and for dual enrollment post-secondary programs. I believe there was a webinar on Title III English learners previously. Under Title IV-A, there's a new grant called Student Support and Academic Enrichment Grants. This is a really flexible block grant that combines various older programs under No Child Left Behind. States and districts will receive grants based on their Title I-A Part A shares. And like other programs, 95% of the amount that the state receives will need to go out to the districts. For districts to receive their Title IV Part A amount, they need to submit an application, prioritize the funds they provide to schools based on greatest need and highest poverty levels. Districts that are getting more than $30,000 must conduct a needs assessment every 3 years. And if the district gets more than $30,000, they have requirements on the types of programs they can fund. And we will talk about this in the next slide. The districts are limited to 2% administration. So the next 3 slides will talk about some of those funding criteria for Title IV Part A. So if the district receives more than $30,000, at least 20% needs to be spent on well-rounded educational opportunities. Some examples include college and career guidance, counseling, arts, STEM, accelerated learning, history, civics, foreign language, and community involvement. If the district receives more than $30,000, at least 20% needs to be spent on safe and healthy students. And some examples of these activities include drug and violence prevention, school-based mental health services, dropout prevention, relationship building skills, nutrition, and physical education, and others. And if the district received more than $30,000, no more than 15% can be spent on technology infrastructure. Under this category, on effective uses of technology, some examples of the spending activities can be devices, building technology capacity, blended learning projects, and professional development. Title IV, Part B, is the 21st Century Community Learning Center program. ESSA kept it as a standalone program and did not combine it with other programs. The structure is pretty similar as the previous law. It is a formula program to states, and that states provide the funds competitively to schools and community-based organizations who partner together. Priority is given to grantees serving students in schools identified for improvement. The minimum amount is $50,000. It prohibits giving preference from grantees using funds for extended learning time during the school day. And the uses of funds now include STEM, computer science, financial literacy, environmental literacy, and in-demand fields of workforce and building career competencies. The remainder of Title IV is a host of competitive grant opportunities for many types of entities. There are too many competitive grant programs to get into a lot of detail in this webinar. We encourage you to review the ESSA summary document on your website and also any other information provided by the U.S. Department and other organizations. Some quick highlights include Title IV, Part C, is a charter school grant, and it has various grant opportunities for charter schools and authorizers. There are percentages of the grants for each program, from supporting high-quality charter schools, the Charter School Facilities Financing Assistance Program, national activities for charter school management companies. Title IV-D, this is the magnet school program, and priority of these grants are given to districts that have evidence-based programs to promote desegregation and student achievement. Title IV-E is family engagement for entities to assist schools and organizations serving high concentration of disadvantaged students in adult literacy training. And Title IV, Part F is national activities grants, and there are various grants under Title IV, Part F, including innovation and research, promise neighborhoods, full service community schools such as wraparound services, school safety, academic enrichment for arts, ready to learn, gifted and talented. Title V-B is for rural education. There are still two parts or programs for rural education, but under ESSA, districts that are eligible for both programs may choose between the two programs. And it also increases the minimum grant amount to $25,000 and makes the maximum amount $80,000. Jumping to Title IX, McKinney-Vento, there was an earlier webinar on the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Program. ESSA reauthorized the McKinney-Vento Homeless Education Program. The new requirements start this October, unlike most of the ESSA programs. There were some significant program changes in the new law, and more attention is certainly placed on homeless youth. But as far as the structure of the grant program and the amount of funding for it, there were not many changes. Under Title IX, there's also a new competitive program for preschool development at the state level. These are one-year grants to help plan, coordinate, and improve on the state's early learning program. For those that receive competitive grants, there is a 30% state match. Lastly, we will talk about non-public equitable services on this slide. When we talk about federal funds, it's important, very important to know that several programs have equitable service requirements for eligible private school students and teachers. In the summary document, there's much more detail about this. Some of the updates to equitable services include, for Title I equitable services, the district must calculate the reservation amount based on the total award they receive prior to any allowable expenditures, set-asides, or transfers. Districts can calculate the equitable service share annually or every 2 years, but it's important to note that funds allocated must be obligated in the same fiscal year they were received. And if it also allows consolidation of Title I equitable services with other funds requiring equitable services. We are anticipating guidance on equitable services, and there are some new requirements placed on the state's efforts for equitable services in addition to the requirements on the district.
Jeremy, thank you very much for your presentation this morning. Really appreciate the overview on those programs and the federal funding. We do have time for some questions this morning, so we're going to get to those shortly. We want to remind everyone that this session is being recorded and will be available for playback. That link can be found on our website, education.ohio.gov/ESSA. So, Jeremy, where can individuals read more about the information you shared this morning?
Thank you, Michael. Well, there's various ways that individuals can read more about what we presented. First, we will have this information on our website, our ESSA website. So we encourage districts or any stakeholders to go on there and pull down our resource guide on this. We also would direct them to the U.S. Department of Education, and as we get more information from the U.S. Department, we will certainly place information on our ESSA website as well as the CCIP. Please be patient as we get more information.
Great, thank you very much. Our next question is about Title IV-A local. Now, is that competitive or not competitive?
Title IV Part A is a formula grant. That program will be allocated to districts based on the relative portion that they receive for Title I Part A.
Great, thank you very much, Jeremy. Now, as we give, looks like we have time for one more question, but before we do that, we want to remind our audience that actually next Friday in the afternoon, we have the Academic Content Standards Review process. So we will be going over that at 3:30 next Friday. And then following that, on September 30th, we'll be looking at the school improvement overview. So we, of course, encourage your participation in those, and the registration links for each of those are available on the ESSA website. So we appreciate that very much. In addition, the department's team is going across the state at our ESSA regional meetings, and we've received some great turnout at each of our meetings so far. We look forward to connecting with everyone at our remaining meetings, including the one this coming Monday in Greater Cleveland. So all the locations are actually on the ESSA website, along with links to RSVP, so we really appreciate that. So actually, we are, looks like we're near the end of our time, Jeremy, so we really appreciate your help this morning in sharing this overview. And this concludes our session. We appreciate everyone's participation. Thank you.